All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 12:30 on a Monday here out of the ordinary, joining you with MNI AAA. Today's lead meeting will be a little bit different, probably a little bit less formal than what you're used to, but would really like to thank MNI AAA for allowing us to be a part of your virtual conference this year, especially their leadership. Our president, Brent Shimmick, Matt Matson reached out to me specifically, outgoing president Mark Weasley. Thank you for your leadership and allowing us to be a part of your virtual conference this week with LEAD. I've talked to a few of our schools here. For those of you that are aware of the police-involved shooting that took place yesterday afternoon, that office is we're about a block from the police station there in Brooklyn Center. We are working remotely today, but I will say this, having been to our office this morning to make sure that our physical building was okay, that the physical building is okay, but our staff is working, but is working remotely. And we know there are a number of schools in and around that area that are doing virtual learning here today due to that. So we're continuing to monitor those events, and our thoughts and prayers go out to all those that are impacted. We will have a Q&A at the end. Really, we have 45 minutes, I believe, planned today, 15 minutes probably at least for our Q&A, a little less formal. Those chat questions can go to Laura. Please don't do that right now, but as we get closer to that last part of today's presentation, we'll take some Q&As to try and assist you with where we're at right now with all whatever's happening in your buildings or in your part of the state. Also, Eric has a session tomorrow morning, I believe I have that right. And so we might prime that pump here today for some of the topics that he will address tomorrow, and some we may not get into as much, not wanting to steal his thunder for tomorrow. You will see primarily Eric and myself presenting here today, Laura as well, and Susie if need be, but we're all here today trying to assist you. Working with leadership again at MNI AAA, if we go to the agenda, we came up with the agenda today as well as what is most pressing with liaisons to trying to gauge where you're at and what we can assist. We're going to talk about our current guidance and requirements, our state tournament summary. We concluded our winter tournaments here this last weekend, and we'll update you on that. Competitive section placement here, it's a busy week for that, along with just some reminders on eligibility and sharing some statistics primarily around bylaw 111 as well. And then we'll do that Q&A, and we'll signal here when we're ready for some of those questions to go to Laura. You can chat those directly. So that's what we have in mind here, and a plan for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Eric to really talk about current guidance and requirements. And then we'll continue on here. Eric, are you with us here?
I am. Thank you, Bob. And good afternoon, everyone. I know we usually come to you in the morning, but it works well here on a Monday as well. And best to you as you work through the virtual conference with MNI AAA. As you know, the requirements come from the state, and our role as the league is to make sure and try and take that information and give it to you as directly and as clearly as we can, so that you know how to apply that within your activities. And so the mask and face covering guidance that's out right now is that it is still required in any competitive setting where it's a team situation or where 6 feet of distance can't be guaranteed. And so that means that golf and tennis are able to be played without masks, but when you get to track and softball and lacrosse and baseball, et cetera, those are going to have masking requirements. Can tell you again, as I did last time we got together, that we have been advocating for a number of weeks to move away from masking within competition outdoors. And we appreciate that our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee also spent some time discussing this at their most recent meeting on Friday. And so we're continuing to message with the Department of Health related to this, but at this time, those requirements remain in place. And the secondary part of that is, as you're managing your venues, the responsibilities around spectators, we recognize as being somewhat challenging because in a lot of cases, you don't have a gate per se where everyone comes through, and it's not maybe the same as selling tickets as you do in the wintertime. But to the extent that you can, identifying or registering those that attend, Lots of you have found technology sources to be able to do Google Docs or similar, where folks can just check off when they've attended, things like that. But again, those requirements of wearing masks at an event when 6 feet of social distance isn't going to be able to be observed at all times, that becomes a requirement, and managing those spectators becomes a part of your job. And then at the bottom, you can see the information around supervision of events. And that has always been a bylaw for Minnesota State High School League, that it's our responsibility. And when you start to bring 4 or more schools together into an event, more often than not, you're going to have someone there that's going to be managing the event. Very appropriate for that individual to be a COVID site supervisor, someone who's going to share the information directly with those that are attending about what's expected, obviously how the event is going to take place, but then also the COVID requirements there. And so appreciate your work in continuing to keep our activities as safe as they possibly can be. And I know that, a lot of folks are paying attention to youth sports and lots of different levels right now. But I would say that our high school league continues to do an outstanding job across the board with addressing the COVID requirements to the best of their ability. Bob, anything you want to add there that I might have missed?
No, I think just reiterating, Eric, I think you've done a really good job in conversations when we can with MDH, and the recommendation not to compete in the spring outdoors with masks has been a priority, yet there's been very little movement. I think the other thing that we want to say, Eric, with MDH, and you're hearing this nationwide, especially coming out of Michigan right now, is how do we take the target off of high school sports or sports in general when you're looking at COVID numbers and where there's communities where there's increased spread. There is a focus on high school sports as a cause of that. And how do we take that focus off of what we're doing, yet still manage what we're doing and manage it well? We know there's fatigue, right? That continues, and we're in this together. I would say around the supervision as well, protect yourself, protect your coaches from being a liability in terms of what MDH is saying. We're going to continue to try and work with them, but again, understand what that says and protect yourself in terms of liability and your coaches along with your student athletes. Anything else there, Eric?
No, I think you did a great job, Bob, of summarizing that and adding a few points there. So I think we can move forward.
I will also reiterate the fact Eric mentioned sports medicine advisory. Our SMAC committee and the board will hear what their recommendations are, and I think you're going to hear very similar to what we've discussed. That we finished our state tournament winter season, thank goodness, right? This past weekend. There's a reason why we don't start all of our seasons on the same date, and there's a reason why we don't finish all of our sports on a date as well. It is 4 tournaments there in the last 2 weeks and a whole lot of thank yous. Again, what we had this winter was different than what we had in the fall, and our fall athletes and participants would have loved to have had what we finished, although it looked really different. We crowned over 30 team champions and so many more that just had that experience to bring closure to their season, along with 80 individual champions alone, just to identify how many tournaments and how many participants that we actually had. Our goal was to provide a postseason tournament experience for the participants. And again, the number of thank yous and the gratitude in a really non-traditional format in many cases was great to see from the teams that did make it that far. Again, we had non-traditional formats and our venues. The number of high school settings or non-traditional venues that we had to use really to pivot and modify what we've done to try and come to bring some closure to those season. Again, access for spectators was really different. Thank you to our TV partner, KSTC Channel 45, for the work that they did in broadcasting our tournaments, and also our streaming partner. Really some great work providing access to those that weren't able to be in attendance, because we know spectators were limited. Yet what we continue to see in that last bullet point is a desired interest in what we do. Again, I think we're learning some things here that we may carry into the future as well. And we're going to get input in a number of different ways for what worked really well. I would say this, our admin reps that were there and arriving with teams fantastic job. Boy, I'm not sure we could have done it without you. The screening, the ability to work with some community members, maybe coaches in difficult situations, was very, very helpful to be able to offer what we did, as much as what we did in so little of time. We needed you to be there and to be a part of that, and you just did an incredible job. So again, if you have questions on how things looked or how they worked at the end, I will say this: for sports that had to wear masks, a vast majority of them did very well. Yet for those few teams that really struggled, or a sport or sports that really struggled with competing with masks, we heard that as well. That was in the minority, and it shouldn't take away from those that were doing it really well. Yet we know on the center stage, especially on TV, that was magnified, and we saw, right, with the struggles that you experienced all year in certain communities and or certain sports. Eric or Laura, or I think Jody's on here with us too. Anything else that I'm missing on the state tournament summary?
Bob, I would just step in and say thank you to our many sites that handled some of our quarterfinal or state preliminary rounds across the state of Minnesota, and the way that they stepped up and just did an outstanding job, especially with a lot of new protocols and requirements, and found ways to make that be successful. And in a lot of ways, we asked you to do that, and provided some level of coverage and financial support, but may not have been as much as you would have liked, or maybe we would have liked even, to be able to provide those experiences. But it got us one step closer and allowed us to be able to bring seasons to conclusion, which, as Bob said, didn't happen in the fall. And it was outstanding, and people did a great job, and just really appreciate all of the work, and especially all of the school settings that helped host our tournaments as we tried to bring that all the way through to the very end. So great job, and really appreciate all of your work. We know that as the administrator in your area and your school, lots is heaped upon you, and really appreciate that work.
Great, thank you, Eric. And I do have one chat that's come to me directly as well. We'll address that at the end. It's a really good question as well. But otherwise, we're going to bring those through Laura here later during the presentation. We're going to spend the next, I think, 3 slides here. I believe we're on competitive section placement. Much of what I will be noting here is out of bylaw 400 around competitive section placement, mainly pages 72 and 73 on the handbook for those that are interested in delving a little bit more into the detailed language around competitive section placement. This week here on the 14th, on Wednesday, trying to work within the virtual conference here as well. AD's advisory will be meeting again to review. It's their job to review all of our competitive section placements. All right, those have been done. We'll work with them looking for consistencies. We've also invited region secretaries to take a peek at those as well, making sure that in certain sports that we're trying to capture both genders in both sports, maybe where they share coaches, and also having them alignment with their admin regions as well. Board of Directors, we believe, will approve them on the 15th, the following day. And just a reminder, again, part of that language, when we're looking at competitive section placements, no matter how many classes there are, right? We're looking at that geographic contiguity. That's actually, there's a backslash in there in the language within the bylaw itself, but it's geographic in nature. We can't dictate where you are located in the state, but that contiguity means that you're not jumping over another section to get to another school, and we're going to show you a graphic of that. It also talks about section balance, and that's in terms of number of teams, depending on how many classes we have. So educate yourself on that, especially those that are relatively new to the profession or inexperienced, the rationale as to where you are placed. Again, and just remember that is not appealable. It's a 2-year cycle as to where you are placed. To help to really show you what that looks like, I wanted to provide a couple of maps that, again, this hasn't been finalized yet, but this is going to be an example. If you look at the visual on the left, this is not how it will look on the website when they are finalized and approved. When we talk about that balance, and this is a sport and a class where we could really be within 4, But in this here, it looks like we're within 3. And again, this is a sport where maybe even numbers aren't as important as other sports, but that's what balance looks like, right? We have similar numbers in each section. Then when you look to the right, that's an actual map, right? That shows that section 8 up there in the teal, I'm going to call it, and section 1 down below. And that's red. Actually, I don't know how it looks on your computer. It looks pretty pink and pretty close to the orange, which is section 2. Note where these are located, right? Depending on the class, what section you're in may be different. If you picture it as time on a clock, and maybe section 1 is at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. Yet when you look at section 4 there in purple, or excuse me, section 5, kind of turns the dial on the clock depending on how many classes you have. So you'll note that really clean lines in this sport. You can see a geographic separations that identify where you're at in those sections. Then we also have a line down below. That's 35, Highway 35. But we draw a line there as well between 2 of our member schools that also shows that there's no orange schools in between. If there were a orange school or team in between there, we would be breaking that geographic contiguity, which means that's no good. We would have to do something different if that were the case. So this is an example of maybe a sport with like a Class A sport. And then I think the next slide shows a far more densely populated classification. So now we're looking at a class that's probably, let's say, a 3A class. And on the left there, you're going to note what that looks like if we don't hone in or focus in on what that separation looks like. The picture on the right is actually just a closer view of those. Again, down below, you're going to notice there that we have 12s across the board. So we were able to achieve really more than balance, right? It's identical in terms of the number of teams that are there. Yet when you look at that close-up view of what those look like, I drew a line between those orange schools, and you're going to note that that line passes again through other orange schools, right? That's section 2, I believe, in this case, is the orange. If there were a blue school that were in there, that would not work, right? It's not randomly grabbing a group of schools, but this shows that geographic contiguity. Yet up in the upper left there, section 8, you can notice how those teal schools dip down closer to the west part of the metro and almost into the metro. That's to get that 12, that group of 12, to create that balance. Remember, I showed you section 5, which is purple, 4, which is green. Notice how that's really shifted. Laura, if you just went back maybe one slide, look where that purple and green is in this map. Those are sections 5 and 4 versus what it looks like in a larger class. In this case, probably a 3. I don't remember which one we grabbed. So again, that shows the geographic contiguity. This is what our maps, these are examples of maps that will be viewed by our AD's advisory for Wednesday. And again, it's their job to make recommendations to the board. They're not necessarily changing anything, but they're making recommendations, looking for consistency, making sure that we have another set of eyes that has achieved what policy says needs to be in place. Eric, Laura, anything I missed here on these couple of slides around competitive section placement?
I think you did a great job, and I think that these two pictures, the slide before and this slide, show the differential between what happens in different classes in the same activity. So I think you pointed to 4 and 5, the green and the purple, but even maybe more dramatic. Usually we're going to see section 1 in the southeast and section 3 in the southwest, section 7 in the northeast and section 8 in the northwest. And in this case, when you look at the Class A side, yellow does exist in the southwest. But when you go ahead by one slide, you're going to see that the yellow actually is on the southeast portion of the metro. And again, that is because of the dispersion of schools that we have. And as we try to build groups that are geographically connected, they don't all match up in the same even geographic area of the state. And so remember that the number doesn't necessarily mean a geographic location, but it is just a grouping of schools that would be connected geographically. So, and again, that balance piece is again a numerical balance aspect. And it is not around quality of team or anything like that, but the balance is about numbers, and the group has worked really hard to make sure that those are appropriately identified.
Yeah, great points, Eric. And again, you'll see live maps probably late afternoon on Thursday following our board meeting, or Friday morning when those become available. Is that accurate, Laura?
They're scheduled for Friday, Bob.
Okay, so Friday, those maps will go live, and we'll have a full agenda here with our board meeting on Thursday of this week. All right, anything else here with competitive section placement? This is probably a good time to start putting questions into Laura for chat as we move along. And just wanted to give you an update as to where we're at, and maybe a little education again around eligibility. Really in my first year working with eligibility to the extent that I am. Again, I've always been on the committee itself. Just so you know, the eligibility committee exists or consists of 5 representatives from our board. So we have a coach, we have ADs, and we actually have a principal as well. Dustin Bossart is the chair of our committee and is a principal. We have 1,100 transfers roughly. We still have that's up to last week, as you'll see, as of April 8th, and there are more that have come in since then. And then again, out of bylaw 111, 146 applications for review. Those are the schools that are appealing for time before the eligibility committee, where a family and the AD or administrators might get that 15 minutes. Of those 146 applications, it's only 40 schools, right? That's a small number within our membership. And then there's 9 schools that have submitted 3 or more, right? And there are some that are more than 3, where a school is submitting thinking that their clientele or a portion of their community believes something is more exceptional in the circumstances in which they're working with. And again, that's not blame or shame. That's the reality in which some are at, but very few really make those applications for review to the eligibility committee. Again, that eligibility committee meets every 2 weeks and is spending at a minimum an hour and a half to 2 hours every week trying to serve your student athletes and your parents and your community when it comes to eligibility. Again, of some of these numbers that you're going to note, 57 were granted full eligibility. I'll give you examples of that where they meet the bylaw and it's going to just naturally be granted, whereas 55 were incomplete or missing documentation and aren't allowed to go before the eligibility committee until that information or that documentation is complete. There's also language that is really separate around an IEP or 504. Those really go directly to Eric, and we try and still have those go through Susie. And in transition, in terms of eligibility, really to me, you're going to be best served if you try and work through Susie first, right? I will do my best to serve you as well, but Susie does a terrific job of monitoring eligibility. She's very, very knowledgeable, and she's an expert of saying, this one I can answer, and this one goes on to Bob or somebody else, right? So she does a really nice job of filtering some of those topics or situations around eligibility, and she can really serve you on a number of those occasions. So feel free to work through her first to see if she can assist you, and she does very well by email and or by phone, but I would say email is preferred. So let's take a deeper dive in terms of those that go before the eligibility committee. Again, just remember that 2 schools agreeing, and this is at number 7, right, under bylaw 111, 2 schools agreeing on varsity eligibility doesn't grant automatic eligibility. It really has to meet one of the 7 criteria that exist right? And that seventh is something that is exceptional, right? And there are some things that were exceptional maybe 13 months ago or 14 months ago that are no longer exceptional, unfortunately, especially around COVID. If it is exceptional and there is documentation, again, what you're going to see is quite often that would be denied, and we put that in quotes. So there were 24 applications that were denied. When that is denied, that means that moves on to the eligibility committee. That has a negative connotation, but it's actually a good opportunity for the family or the student athlete to come before the eligibility committee. Again, those 5 individuals that are going to review which criteria does it fit under. Of those 24, 19 were granted full eligibility by the committee. That means they voted on it. 4 were not granted. All right, so they didn't meet a level within that criteria that that the eligibility committee was comfortable with granting eligibility. They look at every one and try and find a way for them to be eligible. Every motion that is made is to grant eligibility, yet in 4 cases, it was deemed that they were not eligible. There was one that was initially denied at the committee level. Then the next step is they can go before the board to have another set of eyes or a group of people to look at their scenario. One of those was actually granted at the board level. I'm going to take a breath there, and Susie, I would invite you as well. But Eric, anything that I noted here on these statistics around bylaw 111 with eligibility?
No, I think you did a really good job. You mentioned the IEP 504 appeals operate a little bit differently. But again, I think the phrasing of incomplete is an important one for folks to understand. And incomplete doesn't mean that you didn't do your work or that the school or the family didn't. But what it indicates is that there is not enough information for it to be able to rise to the level of granting eligibility. And so they are incomplete until either the student is done with the ineligibility aspect or until they provide additional information that might get us there. And a number of times as we work through these different eligibility cases and more discussion, more details will come forward and more information then just helps the committee to be able to make better decisions around where the eligibility is. So just understanding that term incomplete, I think, is key.
Good, and we want to give you some examples. Again, just 2 schools agreeing on varsity eligibility does not necessarily rise to the level of granting eligibility. So I'm going to give you some examples of what we've seen here through the committee. If you go on to that next slide, I believe, Laura. Here's some examples of those that were just initially granted based on the documentation that we've had. That documented substantial negative change in financial status. Not that we just spent more money last year than we did the year before, but is there a 60 or greater % negative change in their financial status? And that documentation is in the form of tax returns, right? And if you look at the language itself, specifically, how does it apply to what is coming in for their financial status for a family? That documented bullying, I believe it's actually state statute that shows there was a documented report filed by the sending school around bullying. If that hasn't happened, right, we're going to need far more significant documentation around that would show that something like bullying would take place. We've had extreme cases that are very much exceptional in areas of maybe an assault or groups of students involved in behavior where a change is needed for school settings. Completion of a chemical or mental health treatment program. We have seen some of those. And again, that documentation that comes in that says a change in school setting prior to that transfer taking place through a treatment program where they're saying, you know what, student A, B, or C needs a documented change in school setting for whatever reason around maybe chemical and or mental health. Mental health is one. This is one where I think we're going to have to continue to look at that language. As we know, mental health in some cases, we're at a crisis standpoint and what that looks like and how do we best assist our student athletes and our student participants in our buildings. Again, when it comes to that mental health or chemical health treatment, there needs to be a director's recommendation that is in charge, that is in charge, so to speak. Again, recommending that change prior to that transfer is when those scenarios have been granted. Examples on the next slide, I believe, where we've deemed them incomplete, as Eric noted as well. Incomplete means it's just not going to get to that committee level. It could be based on how the committee has viewed them in the past, or in the past meaning even this year. But we're seeing many of them maybe exaggerated due to COVID as well. Committee's done a really nice job of being consistent. Family choice, meaning that our family is deciding that we just need a different setting for our student for various reasons. Some of those may be school choice reasons. Committee's been very consistent this year in terms of in-person learning, virtual versus virtual learning. And we've heard this from our schools. Please don't grant eligibility just based on learning style. And let's not pit schools against each other for those that are in person versus those that are virtual or a hybrid. Smaller class sizes, could be another example really of a school choice or a family choice or that specific curriculum. We went from sending school A to sending school B because we like their math class better, or they have a higher level or a different language that's being taught. Those are examples of things that would not rise to the level to go before the eligibility committee to be reviewed. Sibling preference is another one. Student A started at school A, yet their sister is at school B. We realize we want both of them together. That would not rise to the level of being exceptional and would remain incomplete unless there's something else. That alone would not get it to that level for a review with the eligibility committee. And then there's a lack of documentation around bullying. Bullying is a term that is used widespread, yet again, the language states that there needs to be a report from that sending school. If we could go back, Laura, again, just very quickly to those statistics as well. Again, when you look at the amount of transfers that have taken place, and when you look at those that believe the number of students that they have that are transferring and who is exceptional and who isn't, again, we want to work with you. And there are some scenarios where you will say, I just need your help with this family. I know this doesn't have a chance of moving forward, but I have to say that I advocated for them based on what we had. We can work with that. Yet there are some schools and there are some that just believe everything is exceptional and they just want eligibility because they believe that's best for kids, right? Again, under current language, that doesn't exist. Yet we continue to look at eligibility and how do we best serve you and your families. There's conversations out there, and Erica, I would invite you into this as well. What does it look like coming out of COVID when that time comes? Is there flexibility, or is there something that says, if a student left due to this, that, or the other reason, would they be allowed maybe to come back to the school that sent them? We have some students that have went to neighboring states as examples. I've heard 3 of them last week that have said, we want to come back as soon as now from that neighboring state because we didn't think we'd be playing anything this year. Now Minnesota is, or has been. We want to come back. As of right now, they're not eligible to do so. But is that something that we look at or think about or continue to look at as we head into the 2021-22 school year? Again, I think eligibility continues to be fluid, and we have to make sure that it's relevant with what you're experiencing in this day and age around the movement of student. The priority has not been for athletic purposes, right? It has been for around educational purposes, and what constitutes student have some flexibility for varsity eligibility only. Oftentimes they are eligible for lower level, JV and below, but it's the varsity eligibility that they're missing at that time. Eric, anything I missed here again on how we continue to look at eligibility?
I think just an interesting point. Many are aware that there's a principals advisory committee as well, similar to an AD advisory committee. And This has been a dialogue piece that I've had with that group, just around eligibility rules and how should or could it be impacted as we've gone through a pandemic, and what does that mean? But we just say, by and large, that principals advisory committee said, the rules of the high school league are really good, and we understand them, and we know why they are there. And so they were not highly in favor of significant changes, even going into next year. And just said, people know what they're choosing. They know what the rules of eligibility are. And if they choose a different educational setting or school, that is their choice, and they kind of know that. Doesn't mean that our board won't take some good hard looks at where we are with eligibility and what that looks like as we go forward into the start of next year. But I think that, as people on this call know, our rules have been developed over a course of a long period of time. And so I think that we always want to be very thoughtful about any adjustments or changes that might happen, whether they be temporary or ongoing as we continue forward.
Good, thanks, Eric. And let's jump into questions. I've had a couple that went directly to me and maybe not to Laura. Maybe Laura, I'll start there. And I'm gonna, hopefully this is okay, actually say who asked the question. Les Zellman out of St. James asked about voters registration is one of the criteria in a residence change. If a voter's registration doesn't match where that student is in attendance, how does that impact their eligibility? Voters registration is one criteria that you would need proof and documentation as to what occurred. And is it a bona fide residence change, right? So the receiving school in a situation, if their voters registration does not match their residence, how does that impact their eligibility and their ability to interpret whether they become varsity eligible? Quite often when there's a residence change that takes place and it's bona fide, there's a set of criteria again. Driver's license would be another registered voters registration. Those are examples again of what you'll look to assist you in determining whether or not they are varsity eligible. And then Brian Jamros out of at Centennial as well. Again, we continue to look at, as of right now, for whatever reason you left school A and went to school B, as of right now, there is no vehicle for them to go back to the school that they have left to become eligible. But that's something that we continue to look at as we watch where students went. In some districts, we're seeing 10 to 25% of students have left their attendance and went homeschooled or virtual or charter schools, whatever the case may be. What happens when those students come back, and will they come back to the school that they left? And many of those, again, were, for whatever reason, associated with COVID. I had one more here as well. Let's see. Jamie Carr asked about that supervision, Eric, around 4 or more schools. Does that mean a co-op that attends has to count individual schools involved? I would say no, it would be more teams, right? So did you have 4 teams? Doesn't mean you have 8 teams. If we have a co-op of 4 schools, that would constitute, I believe, as 1 team. So good question there as well, Jamie. Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions. And go ahead.
Number of mass questions, but one that reflects on eligibility, first of all. And the question is, students who are on quarantine, can they serve a violation while they are on quarantine, or do they have to come out of quarantine?
They would have to come out of quarantine. They'd have to be able to participate and or play to serve that violation. Now, again, that would be around a chemical violation. A code of conduct violation is a penalty to be determined by the principal. My recommendation would be that you would be consistent, but you have a little more flexibility around a code of conduct, but you have to be able to compete in order to serve those contests or numbers of weeks when it comes to a chemical violation. Susie, anything there I should have said differently or should be heard differently than what I responded to that question?
No, I don't think so.
So some mask and clarification questions. spectators at outdoor events. Eric, do you want to clarify what we know about spectators at outdoor events and masks?
Yeah, so I think that the language is pretty clear in the guidance that's out there. And if you go to any of the Stay Safe Minnesota stuff, you're going to see outdoor venues and indoor venues. And when it comes to athletic contests and outdoor venues, masks are required just as they are indoor. And that's pretty clear, pretty consistent. And know that some would say that that may not be what, but it feels like is in place for everything else. But that language is very clear in that. The only time in which someone would be able to be unmasked really is when they are guaranteed to never be with anyone other than their household by closer than 6 feet at any time. And so that is something that is required by the state of Minnesota. And kind of building off of that, I know that I've seen a question or two related to track and what happens within competition there, and when do they have to and when don't they have to. So first of all, starting with running events. Running events, very unlikely that you're able to keep them more than 6 feet apart at all times from start to finish and all the way through. And so masks should be worn when you're talking about running events. I think at least 2 different events where we would suggest that masks not be worn and that special efforts be made to keep student athletes more than 6 feet apart would be pole vault and high jump. We'd want to make sure that their vision is not impaired in that way, and that you also find ways that during the time of competition, they remain well spaced out and not have an issue. But then as soon as they finish a jump or a vault, that they could put the mask back on. But I think that that's key. So running events, yes, they should, unless for some reason they'd be running a solo event, which I'm not sure where that would happen. But for some of the field events, again, when you can keep that space at all times, they could remove their mask for the competition aspect of that within track.
So Eric, following with that, questions around baseball and masking. And I believe that the guidance we put out had an example of baseball practice where drills were able to be done as an individual workout and maintain that 6 feet apart. That does not translate into games, correct?
That is a correct interpretation, right? So depending on how practices are held and how you do things, if you can guarantee that everyone is more than 6 feet apart at all times, in other words, finding ways to do individual stations or something like that, could potentially be doing that without a mask. But when we get into competition, because that 6 feet can't be guaranteed, then we do have student athletes that are going to have to be masked. Baseball, softball, lacrosse, etc. As I mentioned earlier, that's what those requirements are.
Eric, another one directed to you. Aaron Forsyth asks, anything around the State High School League entertaining the possibility of a one-time free move in response to COVID? Kind of the same idea that the NCAA has done.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and something that has been discussed a little bit. And I know, Bob, you talked about it with your eligibility committee just a little bit. And what I would say is it wasn't around a one-time free move, but the discussion was really a little bit more around, could someone go back to where they were and not have additional year of varsity ineligibility travel with them. And again, I mentioned talking about that with the principals group. What they identified is a number of students that had left their schools, specifically went homeschool. And so when they come back, they may not have that issue of varsity ineligibility because they would, as a homeschool student in their resident district, they would still be eligible there at that school. But there has been some dialogue and some discussion. And Bob, I don't know if there's more that you'd want to hear about the conversation with the eligibility committee related to that, but if there's topics or ideas there that you want to share, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, Eric, I think of my 4 years here with the Minnesota State High School League, concluding 4 years and my 15 years as an AD, we've been asked the question, I've been asked the question probably half a dozen times on a one-time free move, right? So of those 1,100 students, you know, how many of those would be their first move and you get that one-time free move? Collectively as a group, this group quite often around the state says, I'm really not that interested in a one-time free move because I'm not sure how it's going to impact my community and or my school and or my teams. Yet, when you have that situation where you'd like to have that one-time free move, that's we tend to hear from the same schools or the same activities administrators saying, this is one where we'd like that one-time free move. Of that 1,100, I'm just going to say that there's going to be 25 to 40% that want to come back. So I don't know if it would ever be a one-time free move, right? There's going to be a percentage of students. Let's say there was a one-time free move and then we do away with the review process. I can tell you that there are going to be exceptions where that student thought they wanted to move and got their one-time free move, and they're going to want to come back and believe it's an exceptional circumstance for whatever reason that is. And I don't think it's as simple as one-time free move, but I think we continue to ask that question. We're going to have to continue to do so based on the NCAA model as well. When you're seeing things like transfer portals and or COVID exceptions around the NCAA model, where that comes into play. So where we're at now may not be where we're at in a year or two, or even as soon as 6 months, but let's continue to have that dialogue, and we bring those conversations to the eligibility committee. Eric and Laura, we are at 1:15. I want to be sensitive to the next session that we had. I think we had 45 minutes. Our next lead meeting, I believe, will go back to a week from this Thursday at 10:45, and we'll get that out to you. Liaisons will meet again next week. Thanks again for allowing us to be a part of your virtual conference. Again, especially to Matt and Mark and Brent, thank you. Good luck with your virtual conference. Good luck with the week and spring sports. And we'll continue to advocate for the recommendations that we saw as well around spring sports. So thanks again for all your work.